Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast, Paranormal Karen. Just me today, just me. A little bit of listener mail, listener emails. I got a good doppelganger story. I have a couple of articles I want to read. The biggest chunk of this is going to be about the Enfield Poltergeist. But before we get to that, I'm in Chicago right now. I want to thank everybody at the Nebraska, the Great American Comedy Festival. It was fantastic. My friend Sarah drove 4 hours to see me. She brought me a before tarot deck, which I just cannot wait to open, Sarah. I still haven't gotten to open it. She brought Courage some delicious treats that I assume are delicious. I did not taste them myself, but I know he is more than happy with them. So thank you, Sarah. And last night to the show, my friend Pam came out here in Chicago. So it's so great to meet you folks. Pam is going to give me a reading, and I can't wait because she already told me one thing that was spot on. So that's it. I want to get right to this today because I sat down yesterday at 11:30 a.m. and did not get up until like 6 and was just doing all this research on the Enfield Poltergeist. Now, if you guys have Googled haunted pictures or any videos on YouTube, you probably will recognize some of the photos that were taken during this particular haunting. And to start, before we even get started, I want to talk to you. I know you've heard me say this kind of thing 100 times, but just the difference between a haunting and a poltergeist. So a haunting usually happens to a location. A person can be haunted, but hauntings usually happen on locations, and they usually can go on for years or long periods of time. A poltergeist, which we all know is the German word for noisy ghost, usually happens to a person. And in this case, it gets a little muddled which one we're talking about here. You'll see that as we go on here. It usually does not last for years. It usually goes on for months and then it stops. But sometimes people used to think a poltergeist was a ghost or an entity outside of a person. But more and more we find it's an energy coming off a person. It's either sort of they have a lot of psychic energy that sort of pops or explodes or ricochets off and things start moving. There's a lot of moving parts in this story today. So we'll get started and you'll see what I mean by the end. So this was in 1977. It was at 284 Green Street in Enfield, England. It was Peggy Hodgson was a single mom. She had just gotten a divorce. She had 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. And she, they were, well, we'll just say it, they were very poor. In fact, when you listen to the videos, you get kind of the feeling they were living in government housing in England. And so things were pretty tough. The story really surrounds around the 2 sisters, especially the one named Janet. They were 11 and 14. You don't hear a lot about the brothers as the story goes on, but it did mostly surround around Janet. It's funny because in my parapsychology class, sometimes they talk about how Wikipedia is not really good to the paranormal. It seems to have some sort of a bias. And boy, was that true, because that was the first thing I opened to look at this case. And it almost started out in the first couple of lines about talking about it like it was a hoax, which is interesting because there is so much evidence. I don't know how someone can start out like that. There is a small part of the story where something did happen that was a little bit like a hoax, but it was definitely not what you would open with. They keep saying alleged poltergeist or alleged haunting, but there are way too many people that have seen the evidence that it's kind of tough to use that word. This was, in fact, the biggest. There really wasn't a case this big before then. Like I said, it was 1977. They kind of made a reference that this is where someone got the idea for the Ghostbusters movie. And a lot of this will surround around something called the Society for Psychical Research. And oddly enough, that is something I learned quite a bit about in my Intro to Parapsychology class. The whole spiritual movement, they call it the spiritualist movement, got started in the late 1800s, or it really took off at that time when there was two sisters from upstate New York called the Fox sisters. And they were also very young, also in their teens, and they started hearing rapping on their walls, knocking on their walls, which is kind of what you hear a lot of, where a lot of things start. And they somehow started communicating with the rapping on the wall, tap 1 for yes, 2 for no kind of thing. And they started to make a connection with a spirit named Philip, I believe. Not sure on that last part. But they actually became so popular that they sort of took their act on the road, and this started the whole spiritual movement. And it became so popular and so big that a bunch of academics got together and said, we better check this out. We better see what's going on, see if this is all poppycock, as they would have said in that time, poppycock. And that was where the Society for Psychical Research came from. So that is not just like, and now I know we have a lot of paranormal groups that just kind of get together and learn as they go and do the best they can. These were real scientists and real academics that wanted to get together. And it's not to say that they weren't believers or were believers, but they wanted to check it out and get evidence. Very much like when I take my classes at the Ryan Institute, they're very careful about treating this as a science, not as much of a metaphysical or a woo-woo. They want evidence. They want lab tests. They want to do the best they can. They want definitions. So that's why I go to that class, which I enjoy so much. You should all take it. So I talked about Wikipedia. Let's get to it because this story has so much to it. I have 3 different things of notes here. Okay, and I'm going to put these to the side because they come up later. All right, so August 30th, 1977 was the first night that all of this started. There is a book. It's called This House is Haunted by Guy Lyon Playfair. You want to read that if you want the whole story here. So on that night of August 30th, Janet and her brother, Peter, started complaining that their beds were wobbling for some reason. And their mother, of course, ignored them and told them to go to sleep. And that was sort of nothing. So on the 31st, other people in the house started to complain that things were wobbling, but the mother didn't know what to do about it. At about 9:30, she puts the kids to bed, and then she hears a loud crash. And she goes upstairs, and a chest of drawers, as they call it in England, or I guess it would be a bureau. That's what I would call it. Chest of drawers has been pushed out into the middle of the girls' bedroom. And she, of course, yells at the girls who say they didn't do it. And she pushes the chest of drawers back to where they were. As soon as she steps aside, the chest of drawers move themselves back into the middle of the room. She pushes the chest of drawers back where it's supposed to be. Once again, the chest of drawers moves itself back to the middle of the room. And this time, when the mother goes to push against it, she can't. It's as though someone is holding it there so she can't move it. So this, of course, freaks out everybody in the house. They get all upset. They go to talk to their neighbors who come over and can't help them, and they start to experience the same thing, and they don't know what to do. And at this point, everyone is so upset, they don't know if they want to go to bed, they don't know what to do, so the neighbors call the police. So the police come in, and they actually have testimony from one of the police officers of what they saw. They signed an affidavit to say that this really happened. They came over, and they started hearing the knocking on the walls. They didn't really know what to do. And then at one point, a big armchair in the living room starts to wobble and then moves itself 3 to 4 feet across the floor. Okay, they check everything. They check if someone has put strings on it. They check if there's something slippery on the bottom. The lady puts down a marble to see if the floor is not even. They could not figure it out at all. But then again, they were like, well, no crime has been committed, so we don't really know what to do here. But they do always talk about how they had that one police officer, a woman, of course, that signed and said, this is really what happened, that we can't explain it. You know what else, folks? I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that, but I'm sure you can imagine when things start to move on their own. That is the freakiest thing that you will ever see or experience. That alone is enough to see something move with no reason for it. All right. So that family had to be pretty freaked out at that time. During the next 3 days, the activity picks up even more. Plastic toys, little Legos are flying around the room. When they go to pick them up, they're hot. The family didn't even know what the word poltergeist meant at this time. They just knew pieces were flying all over the house. When family members would sit on a chair, it would spin around, or they would be thrown from the chair. And it would always start with a rapping on the walls for whatever reason. They hear the knocking on the walls, and then the activity would start, and things would just be all over the place. So they did not know what to do. They couldn't figure out. The neighbor, who was actually very helpful, actually called in the press. He started calling the newspaper, and of course they were ignoring him because before this time, nothing like this had ever been reported. It would be, they thought they were having their leg pulled or it was a hoax or something. Finally, after the fourth call, the Daily Mirror sent a reporter out there. And on September 4th, 1977, the reporter went out there. The family went over to the neighbors so the reporters could be in the house alone. Of course, nothing happens. And then as soon as they go to their car, the family calls them back and says, wait, come on back in. The knocking starts, the activity starts, things are flying all over the place. They're taking pictures. They're trying to get all the evidence they can. They can clearly see this is not a trick. The families wanted to stay at the neighbors, but now everything just started flying around. In fact, one of the photographers just kept taking picture after picture after picture until a Lego flew and hit him in the eyebrow, almost hit him in the eye. They had so much evidence, they went back, and the editor from the newspaper the next day became so concerned about this family that he then called the Society for Psychical Research, and that's when they brought in Maurice Grosse. Now, keep in mind, this family they didn't know the word poltergeist. They didn't know there was a Society for Psychical Research, which probably you also didn't until I said it right there. And I didn't until I started my classes. So there you go. So they send in an investigator named Maurice Grosse. Now, Maurice was an investigator. He was also, I believe they said, an electrical engineer or something like that. He was a World War II fighter pilot. He was also an inventor, so he had all kinds of really good background, very smart guy. He's the guy you'll see in most of the interviews. And if you Google Enfield Poltergeist, he's the one taping and talking to the girls. When he got there, marbles were already being thrown around. The one thing he noticed is when these objects that were thrown around that were hot landed, they didn't bounce. They didn't, something didn't throw across the room and then bounce across the floor. It would sort of just hit the floor and stay there, which is very odd, but is another way of showing that they really couldn't, if somehow this was a hoax and they were throwing these things all over, they would have bounced, but they didn't. They just landed. So that was another thing. He saw chairs were turning over, all kinds of stuff. So when they were around the house, the drawers would open and close, just kind of nightmare activity all over the place. They put in remote cameras and took photos of everyone. They had everything from curtains being twisted to covers being pulled off the girls. So Maurice Grosse, he brought in the author that I talked about in the beginning, guy guy Playfair that wrote This House is Haunted, simply because he could not keep track of all the activity himself. He needed somebody to help him. Good bless me. God bless me. Sorry about that. I was really hoping that sneeze would come in at the 20-minute mark, but it hit me at 14. All right. Pardon my sneezing. They had this big leather armchair, again, still moving all over, turning people over. They had so many experiences. And also by this time, there were so many journalists in there that were seeing this. It was just crazy. In fact, they talk about how the stories were even more compelling because they were the journalists' personal experiences. They weren't just reporting on something they may have seen or something. These were personal experiences they were having. Hang on a sec. I forgot to turn over my paper. So this became a really big deal. There were people around the house all the time. At this point, these girls and their families' lives was turned upside down. I always wonder if this is why you hear very little about the brothers at this time. I wonder if they were just sort of in hiding. Now, at this point, this is where Wikipedia starts its page, and it shouldn't. There was a lot of pressure for things to happen. There were a lot of people around. There were a lot of stories, a lot of journalists. So at this point, the girls did try to show some activity themselves. They tried to start, hoaxing is a word. But every time they did, they were caught because Maurice knew what was going on. The photographer knew what was going on. And it was so easy, they said, to tell the difference. They really could not replicate. They would have had to have been geniuses to replicate the other activity. On September 10th, it really became a national phenomenon. And that's when these journalists were all reporting their experiences and hanging around. It got weird at this point, and this may be also why the girls started trying to hoax things, 11 and 14-year-olds, how old they were, because two other newspapers came in and offered them huge sums of money to say the whole thing was faked. And I find that very odd, unless I was trying to think what would be the thinking of that. And it could be that the Daily Mirror was probably getting so much out of this story that these other two newspapers wanted it shut down. But the girls said no to the money, and they were very poor. So they may have been enjoying the attention, and the activity to perform was probably very high at that time. But they were caught every time, and it was just, it was so easy to distinguish. But I find that very interesting that a newspaper offered them money. I wonder how many times that actually happens when we see someone back off or admit they lied, that it was actually a newspaper paying them to do it, whether they believed that or not. So even though all this was going on with their experiences, it was almost like there was a weird turn in the situation. And even some of the people working with Maurice Grosse started to kind of get suspicious of him. Not that he was causing the activity, but that he was so into this case that his skepticism was compromised. And they talk a little bit about his background, which is very interesting. He had a daughter that had passed away, which was a little bit of how he got into the paranormal in the first place. But they had some other people that they interviewed that, if you ask me, it sounded like they got very, very hard on him. And they sort of tried to get under his judgment and say that he wasn't reporting correctly, even though so many people had seen this themselves. So that was sort of an odd turn. It just continued, and it just continued getting worse. A photographer came in to take pictures, and this was in the 70s, so I don't know that much about the flashes that they used, but he said he had 2 flash cases that were loaded, which I'm not positive what a flash case was, but I guess it's a flash bulb that is charged and has many charges in it. He said he walked in, and as soon as he went to take the picture, all the flashes went off at once and the battery immediately drained. So that's pretty typical poltergeist activity. At one point, they tried to use an IR camera, but they wanted to get the shot in the dark so they could see if there was anything moving or anything they weren't catching, when the girls were asleep. And immediately, every time they turned on the IR camera, something would turn up all the lights in the house. So, and if they got any footage at all, by the time they left, the footage was destroyed for some reason. They talked about a piece of recording equipment, where by the time they got it back to the lab or where they could listen to it, metal pieces on the inside were bent and all the tape had been erased. So, hold on, folks. I will be right back. I have a new favorite thing. It's my ring from Copper Case Jewelry. I did a show in Colorado, met a wonderful young man named Casey who told me he made crystal jewelry. So I'm in. That's all I had to hear. He makes raw crystal jewelry using copper electroformulist techniques. Do I know what that means? No. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing those words correctly. All I know is I love the final product. It has become my favorite ring. And I know you're thinking, crystal ring, that sounds kind of clunky and sharp. Is it going to be heavy, or is it going to get caught on my sleeve every time I put my coat on? Absolutely not. It is the most delicate, perfect size ring. I even wear it through yoga, and it's uncomfortable to wear jewelry in yoga. Not this. You got to check out Casey's pieces. Go to @29 Copper Case on Instagram, and you can see all his new work. You can also email him if you want something special at 29coppercase@gmail.com. Check it out. I know you're going to love it. Okay, so before I get back to my story, I'm going to start playing you guys some clips, and I apologize about the quality because I'm on the road, so I don't have all my equipment with me, all my fancy stuff. But I'm going to play just a real quick, I don't even think it's a minute clip right now, and then get to the end of the story of Janet. These voices, she started having voices, and they were coming out from sort of behind her. You could see in the video her lips are quivering, but she's not speaking. And this is one of the tapes that came out where Maurice Gross is interviewing her. And I'm just going to play like 30 seconds of this before I continue. This started happening later, and there's some evidence in here that is pretty fascinating. Okay, hold on.
These teenage sisters believe they're haunted by a poltergeist.
I was going to ask the same question as I asked earlier. How many voices are there?
600.
600 of the voices.
I know the joke.
How many really are there, Margaret?
I think so far we've had 10
Right.
sensible voices, but the rest of the names are absolute rubbish.
Okay, so that weird, that's coming from behind Janet while her sister talks. So I hope you guys can hear that. So that started, and they had so many voices in the house. And I know that if you read the book by the Warrens, who really are controversial people, they talked about, because a lot of people say their books were ghost written, or they are not, they aren't their exact stories. I don't know, but they're pretty scary. And they did go to this house. In fact, I think they always say The Conjuring came from this story, although it was quite different. That story's not even close to this. So I don't know if that's where they got the idea, or they think they got the idea. But they said when they walked into that house, the disembodied voices were everywhere. They just kept going. So at this point, things start to get even stronger. And here's why. And I'll play some more clips for you later. So Janet got her period. So I know you're like, oh, great. That's what every teenage girl wants everybody to know. But because poltergeists are usually connected to a young girl in puberty, after that, everything got more intense. They had fires that would pop up. At one point, a physics student that knew of what was going on came to the house and asked Janet if she could make a large red cushion. And when you see the size of this thing, it's very big. It's something, it's very big and heavy. He asked her if she could sort of make it dematerialize upstairs and pop up downstairs. Well, she tried it, and what happened was the cushion didn't go downstairs. It instead dematerialized and then rematerialized above the house. And people from outside of the house saw this large red cushion above the house. They had witnesses outside that swore to it, could not understand what was going on. It came out on the roof, and it was very heavy. It was something that even a large male, because of the way the roofs were, would have trouble getting it up there. This physics student asked Janet to do something else. He asked her to float into the neighbor's house. I don't know what this looked like. They don't talk about it that much, but the neighbors weren't home. These were the neighbors that had originally helped them. He asked Janet to float over there, which she did. And then she came back and she said, I left something over there. So at that point, the neighbors came home after work and found she had left a book there. Now this is when the voices start. Hold on. Let me get rid of my notes. Okay. Okay. So, there's other pictures now of the girls levitating. They would start sliding out of bed. There were like 5 frames of the girls levitating. And a lot of people would say, well, it looks like she jumped off the bed, but she really didn't. And if you look at those frames and figure out how quick they were or how slow they were, you realize that did not happen. At this point, they had to sedate her. It took like a few adults to hold her down and sedate her just to get her to go to sleep. And at one point they sedated her. She was asleep. Everybody went downstairs. They heard a loud crash. They go back upstairs. She is moved about 15 feet off of the bed onto a dresser. And you can see a picture of that online too. People in the house outside of the house actually would see her levitate. People would be walking by and see her floating through the windows. So at that point, the voices started. The voices I just played for you, which I'm going to look for some longer clips. And I think I can get you that whole interview that he did in one piece. I have pieces of it from the BBC special, so I might just try and add that on. In fact, I think I will play that for you guys. They had a speech therapist come in and ask if she could make these voices, because there's actually, I think they covered this there was a movie that Laura Linney made, the Possession of Emily Rose, which is really a great movie. And they talk about how there is an actual set of vocal cords that you could do this with. But first of all, the speech therapist could not figure it out, could not make sense of it. She left the house completely freaked out. The conversations went on and on for hours. They had a ventriloquist actually come to see if he could figure out how she was doing it. And he said there was no way that a voice that deep and that gravelly could come from a young girl. They kept getting messages from, you'll hear her say this, from someone named Bill, who he kept giving the message that he was a former resident who died in the chair downstairs. He went blind. And he says he passed away in the chair downstairs. You can hear Maurice ask him about heaven, and he says something like, I'm not kind of a heavenly guy. I'll find that for you guys in a second. That voice got out into the media somehow, or somebody talking about this story. And his son actually contacted the author later and confirmed that all that information was correct, that was his father. He had gone blind and he had died in that chair. I believe he also said that he recognized his father's voice. At this point, Maurice split from the Society for Psychical Research. There was someone there was a woman there that really thought he was handling it wrong. And it's funny because they interview her and she still kind of attacks him a little bit, but she does not take into consideration how many of the media, the neighbors, the affidavit, how many people were on board with this. And she thought he just sort of became enchanted with it. With that voice that Janet was doing, they would have 3-hour conversations. And someone said, it's almost like if you tried to do that, if you've laryngitis, you'll be speaking with the same vocal cords they were saying she was. And they would say, your voice couldn't go on for 3 hours like that. In 1978, Janet was admitted to the hospital for examination to see if anything was wrong with her. The hospital could find nothing wrong with her, not even mentally. She was a good student. Everything was working out. At one point, the family left the house. They went on vacation. And at one point they were staying with their brother. They were staying at their brother's house. And everyone was thinking that the whole haunting right now was just surrounding around Janet. But they left something at the house. It was an odd story. The mother's brother went back. This would be their uncle, went back to retrieve an alarm clock for some reason. He went into the house and went up the stairs. As he went up the stairs to go to the bedroom to retrieve the alarm clock, the bedroom door opened. He went in, the bedroom door closed behind him. He grabbed the alarm clock, turned around to go, and the bedroom door opened. So at this point, he has to figure, well, first of all, for whatever reason, he's staying in that room after that happens or worrying about an alarm clock. I really don't know. He goes downstairs and sees someone sitting in a chair. He saw a man sitting at the table with a white and blue striped shirt with his eyes closed. The guy had his back to him, I think, or he had his back to him. I don't know if his eyes were closed, but he had his back to him. And he went to say, the brother went to say, hey, who are you? Or get out of here, or what's going on? And he realized the house he was in, and he closed his eyes. And when he opened them, the guy was gone. So at that point, the brother said, I'm never going back to this house. And so it really wasn't just surrounded by Janet. I think they kind of had a perfect storm of things going on there. They had, her having that psychic ability, sort of throwing that poltergeist around. And they also seem to have some sort of vortex or some sort of, the guy that was there before was still haunting it. And I think it was just one of these weird times where everything happened all at once. And there was so much paranormal energy in there or something like that, that's why it all happened like that. Now I'm going to tell you actually how it ended, which is fascinating. And then some of the interviews they did. And then the last part, I'm going to play some of the tapes that are online about Janet and kind of how creepy this whole thing was. We'll see. I'll see if I can get as many clips as I can for you guys. A medium, a Dutch medium who didn't speak English. This was after all this went on, came over to the house. He was supposed to be one of the best mediums. I'll get his name for you. I thought it was Bono or something like that. And he said he could handle this. And he went upstairs to the bedroom. It took him 20 minutes. And when he came down, the whole incident was over. They said 6 months later, there was a small amount of activity, but that was it. This guy went up. He fixed it. I don't know if that was perfect timing because Janet was coming out of whatever activity was going on around her, or he crossed over the other people or told them they couldn't come or closed the vortex. I don't know, but it was literally that quick, 20 minutes, and the whole thing was over. When I see interviews with the family later, they really do seem like they're still, they believe what happened there. I still think they believe everything. They know the little hoaxes. They know what was real. And I think they're still terrified. But what is interesting to me is when you see Janet as an adult, no one ever asks her about her psychic ability now. Because I would think if you were that strong or that active as a kid, that kind of energy was coming off of you, you would have some psychic ability or intuition now. But nobody asks. And that went on, folks, for months. So now I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to get back and play you guys some audio from the YouTube tapes. All right. Psychic medium and buddy of mine, Terry Huberman, is with me today. Terry, you've given me so many great readings and healings, and now you've got everything together in one package. Tell me about that.
I sure do. So this package has energy healings, readings, and coaching.
Coaching, that's the best. And people, they buy the package. You give them coaching once a week?
Yeah, so we meet online once a week, and in between, there's support as well.
And who would this be for?
This is really for folks who are in indecision, needing to get into their intuition because they're blocked or stuck. They need to move forward. And so we explore what the root causes of the problems are.
And helps them get out of their own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terrific. And what can they expect from this?
Sure. So moving from anxiousness to confidence, accessing their freedom, joy, and security, and really being in alignment with themselves so they have that clear direction, so they know, aha, this is what I need to do next to reach my goals.
So now there's something that's free so people can talk to you and see if this is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. On my website, terryhuberman.com, there is a page where you can click, and it's the intuitive coaching package. And there is a button there that says schedule a free call. So you go ahead, schedule it. We'll get on a call, and you can learn more about this program, and we'll see if this is a good fit for you or not.
See if there's chemistry.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's an odd date.
terryhuberman.com, TerrieHuberman. I highly recommend it, folks. Okay, so I'm going to just play this whole clip from you. This is from a BBC. This is on YouTube. This is from a BBC. You'll hear Morse Gross, and they'll announce them. I was going to break it up, and then I was like, you know what? You'll just want to hear the whole thing. And once this guy from the BBC starts interviewing the girls, listen, it kind of goes on for a while. He talks to them for a while. There's some background noise, but you want to listen for the rapping, where there's sort of a knocking on the wall like this. And once you hear that, it'll start. But I'm going to play it right from the beginning, including the interview with Maurice Gross. So this is going to go on for about 12 minutes. But I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you can hear it. It is 12 minutes. So if you need to turn it up wherever you're listening, I'll try and get you out of it gently so that I'm not screaming in your ear. Okay, here we go.
These teenage sisters believe they're haunted by a poltergeist.
I was going to ask the same question as I asked earlier. How many voices are there?
600.
600 voices.
I never joke.
How many really are there, Margaret?
I think so far we've had 10
Right.
sensible voices, but the rest of the names are absolute rubbish.
11-year-old Janet Hodgson appears to be the focus of many of the strange happenings in Green Street. But they also affect her 14-year-old sister, Margaret, and their younger brother, Billy. One of the first manifestations was when Lego bricks began to fly at high speed around the living room.
How does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?
It's not haunted. Shut
Why isn't it haunted?
up. I don't know.
Does it frighten you, the things that happen here?
Oh, well, it did first, but now I've got more used to it and learned to accept the things that happen. It's slung covered at Mum. Eat it, Mum. Slung a bookshelf at Margaret.
Have you tried telling it to go away?
Yes, many times.
And what does it reply?
No, it won't. It'll stay another 6-7 years.
The local police could find no explanation for the knocking either. They were even more baffled when two of their beat constables reported seeing an armchair levitate across the Hodgsons' living room.
It came off the floor, or nearly a half inch, I should say,
and I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked to see whether or not it could possibly have slid along the floor. I placed a marble on the floor to see whether or not the marble would go in the same direction as the chair did, and it didn't roll at all. I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair, and I could find no explanation at all.
Maurice Gross is an electronics engineer and an investigator for the Society for Psychical Research.
Over here was Janet, and over here, in this bed here, was Margaret.
It was in the same bedroom a month later, with all the family present, that Maurice Gross first challenged the poltergeist to talk.
And this was actually the result. You'll hear the whistling first of all, and then the barking. And here is this noise. The barking here is quite extraordinary, actually.
We got a dog in here.
I then said to it, you can whistle. I then, as I said on the tape here, I then said to it, if you can whistle and bark and groan, then you can talk. And I asked it to actually say my name.
Oh,
Well, just a minute. Right, we'll try again. I want you to call out my name. My complete name. Maurice Gross. See if you can do that. Very good. Let me hear you say my name again. Come on, let me hear you say my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it. Morris. Now that was the first time we heard the voice, and since then we've been hearing it again and again, and it's been getting louder and louder.
What about the voices? When did the voices start?
December the 12th.
December the 12th?
Yes.
And how did they start?
Well, one night Mr. Gross was talking about it about 8:30. He said, all we need now is the voices to talk. And that night we went to bed, and I can't remember exactly what happened.
What's that knocking?
Yeah, I can hear it now. I was doing that yesterday morning, and Peggy was on her own. So she come in to us, because it wasn't her, she come in. We sat together and we heard it. And I counted down my knocks, and there was 14 altogether. And it's doing it again now.
That was 3 knocks just now?
Yes, it goes in 3s and 2s. When we first got contacted, this was when Mr. Gross said, if there's anyone there, knock twice for yes, and if not, 1 for no.
I wonder if we did that now, whether it would answer. Is anybody there? Is anybody there?
It doesn't always do it to order. No, it doesn't. It goes in spasms. Like we're talking now. It may not now, after you've said that, but it won't do it when you want it to, straight away, you know.
What about the voices? They sometimes see things and make answers. Is that the voice now?
Yeah.
Is anybody there? How many voices are there?
Dirty Dick, Andrew Garner, and Stuart Thurton.
Dirty Dick, Andrew Garner, and Stuart
Thurton.
Oh, has he ever spelt that for you?
No. Mr. Ghost asked him, but it's like distracted Mr. Ghost last night when he asked. That was some time ago.
And what do you think these are? Are they people, or are they just voices?
Could be spirits, I don't know. I believe it's a ghost, a spirit, speaking for us, somehow. No. We don't get this at school, these voices, though. Because I believe when we're all separate, it's not so strong.
Just when you come near each other?
Yeah, like here, or our aunts, we're all up there together, or in Peggy's next door.
And Janet's, your voice is stronger, isn't it? It seems to be the strongest.
Yeah.
When you hear the voice, and it comes out, where does it come from? Here, your throat?
No.
Where do you feel it comes
from? Back of the neck. Back of the neck.
And so it must be as if it's somebody else speaking there when you hear it?
Yeah, behind us.
And do you get the feeling when you hear the voice that there is a person there?
Yes.
Yeah. And do they tell you much about themselves?
Not really, no.
They just tend to growl and
play around and sort of joke and be silly. No.
I wonder, do you think there's anyone there just now?
Yeah, I do.
Who's that?
What?
Who's that, Janet?
Pardon? Stuart Certain.
Stuart Certain, and he's one of the voices?
Yeah.
Why do you think he comes and speaks through you?
To annoy us.
Does he ever say anything nice?
Well, I don't know really.
Shall we try and speak to him? No. We'll see if he'll speak to us.
Yeah.
Is anybody there?
No.
Who's there?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who?
Ghost Chasers here.
Mr. Gross, a lot of people, hearing these voices produced by the children, will simply say that they are very good ventriloquists and that this is all a hoax. How would you react to that?
Certainly not. They're certainly not very good ventriloquists. We have had tests on them to see whether they can ventriloquize. They can't. To keep up this particular type of voice for any length of time without damage to the vocal cords is absolutely impossible. I mean, there must be some hoarseness attached to it. But don't forget, these children don't do this for a couple of minutes or so. They do it for lengths of periods up to 3 hours, and without any hoarseness or sore throats whatsoever. Well, perhaps you've got something to say, sir.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how you make this noise without bashing Janet's vocal cords to pieces. If I do it for half a minute, I get a sore throat. Joe?
Guy Lyon Playfair is an author of books on the paranormal, with experience of poltergeist cases in Europe and Brazil.
How do you do it, mate?
God, hours.
Don't you ever get a sore throat, Janet?
No.
Sure.
Yeah.
You never get pain in the back of the neck or something?
No. Oh, what do you mean? I'm sorry, I'm not with you. What? I feel...
You with me now? With you?
Sensation in the back of the neck, yeah.
Well, tell us about that.
I don't know how to explain
tell me about that. You get it now? Buzzing in the back of the neck.
Yeah.
Do you feel it vibrating as if it was sort of...
No, like someone got their hand on the back of my neck like that.
Poltergeists seem to thrive on an atmosphere of tension that is partly sexual. The fact that most of the focuses are adolescents seems to contribute to the mischievous nature of the effects, leading some to suggest that the kids are faking or enjoying a laugh at the expense of the investigators. But to create all the bizarre effects that went on in this house either involves a gigantic conspiracy with the neighbours or a disruption in our laws of mind and matter.
Okay, how's that? How's that voice? I'm going to, let me see if I can find you one more, folks. Okay, so this tape right here is very long. It's 5 minutes and it's very hard to hear, but I want you to stick with it. You'll be able to make it out. Remember, these were taped in the 70s, but by the end, you can hear how these conversations were so frequent and talking to this person named Bill. Here you go.
Say my name. Come on, let me hear you say my name. That's not my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it. Morris. Say Dr. Belloff. Come on, let me hear you say that. Come on. Let's hear you say Dr. Belloff. Could you close that door down? Say Dr. Belloff. What is it? Now, if you squeak the bed, I can't hear you talking. Now, say Dr. Belloff. Come on. Come on, say it for me, Dr. Belloff. Dr. Belloff. Right, that's good. Come on, shut up and door. I'm 72 years old. I come from Jewelry graveyard. And I have right near the church where Rita lives. And all my friends come from there as well. And we all make a game and go to the pub. And then we pick your house. Because I used to live here. And I will tell you some more. And if you don't get anyone else, the same talk and Mr. Playback.
I want you to tell me whether you remember what happened to you when you died. Just before you died and just after you died.
I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs.
Bill, if you're there, would you answer me the following question? What have you done with Denise's 30p?
Downstairs.
Sorry, Bill, can you say that again, please?
He's after radio downstairs.
Right, Bill, I'll go and look. Thanks so much. Why can't Janet feel you?
I'm invisible.
You're invisible? Why are you invisible?
So much you hang out
Did any friends go with you?
Yes, all of them. All the dogs, 68 dogs.
So what do you got 68 dogs for?
So that they can protect me from you killing me. They can bite your head off.
How can we kill you, Bill?
You can shoot me off.
Now how can we shoot you if we can't see you, Bill?
By praying to God.
Sorry, I didn't hear that, Bill.
By praying to God.
By praying to God. So, what you're saying is we couldn't get rid of you by praying to God?
Yes.
Okay, this is
All right, folks.
Media
Sorry,
Productions. I was
I didn't turn that off fast enough. Well, folks, there you go. There's your nightmare. And proving people are no more interesting on the other side when they get there to us. Special thanks to Mike at Uno Rising Media. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this bizarre one. Look up the Enfield Haunting on YouTube. You'll find a million clips. And thanks for listening. Leave me 5 stars if you can. And see you next week.